Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robbie Sassoon. I'm the director of Crossroads. And, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know, Crossroads is an organization that offers therapeutic support, crisis intervention, educational support, job support, enrichment, to teens and young adults in Jerusalem, but really at this point in all of Israel. We've been thinking a lot amongst our staff how to continue doing that during this challenging time, and we've been able to continue, offering definitely all of our therapy meetings, which we offer for free. We have our hotline and all of our programs going on. If anyone here knows of a teen or a young adult that could use a social worker or a therapist to talk to, they're welcome to contact us at some point. We'll put in the chat, different ways of how to reach out to Crossroads. We had this evening planned. Many weeks ago about creating a calm and a happy home, which may, on the one hand, seem like a very foreign concept right now, although we still believe in creating a calm and a happy home. And while we were on the verge of canceling the event because maybe the title wasn't so matim, our staff and Reuven Hyman, on our staff said, no, let's reframe it, let's offer something. And, with really the help of all of the wonderful speakers and experts that we have tonight, we came up with a concept and with content that we think will be very, very meaningful. I just briefly wanted to, thank the Crossroads staff, Nechama and Reuven and Sigalit and the rest of the staff for helping make this happen. And each of the speakers, Dr. Shira Wiesen, Dr. Zev Gans, Karen Green doesn't have to be a doctor, and she's the founder of Crossroads as well, that we're really thrilled to have each of you here. The format of the evening will be that each speaker will speak for anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes about the topics that were written about on the flyer. And once the three, while they're speaking, people should be welcome to send Sigalit a direct chat. Sigalit, you could put something out again, letting people know that they should send you they should send you a message with any questions that people have. The questions will get to me, and when the evening is over, we'll ask all the questions, as many as we can, to the panel, to all the panel speakers. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment of reflection and prayer to really take in the moment and to really pray for all of those who are protecting us, and send comfort to all the families who experience loss. On that note, I'm going to welcome Dr. Zev Gans to talk about keeping it simple, the effectiveness of co-regulation in connecting to our children and instilling calm during times of crisis and tragedy. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Dr. Gans.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. And thank you to everybody for joining us. The topic of the presentation is about co-regulation. Co-regulation is about being together, and as we're going to talk about, being together is most important in times of crisis. And so it's a privilege for me to be here with everybody, and for us to have an opportunity to be together, which is especially important, during a time of mourning and a time of crisis. Okay, so the introduction to the title of this presentation today is keeping it simple. What I want to talk about today is things that all of us already know. It's usually these things that we all already know that are the most important. I'm gonna allow my more talented and intelligent colleagues to get into the really, really hard stuff. I want to focus on what's simple and what we already know. What I'd like to do is to give us a bit of a deeper understanding about why these things that are so simple are also so important. Okay, so co-regulation. Let's talk a little bit about what that is. In order to talk about what co-regulation is, we need to talk about what regulation is. And it's regulation is really just a fancy word for how our body manages activation, how the body goes up and down, and how our nervous system controls those processes of ramping up our bodily processes and then allowing us to calm it down. Fundamentally, what our body does is that it prepares the body for action when it's needed, and then it deactivates that excitation when that stimulus from the outside has passed. Actually, getting this right is really, really important, and it often happens automatically, and it escapes our awareness of just how important that is, right? If you think, just to get a sense of how important that is, if you imagine a lion just jumps into the room that you're sitting in, it's really important, first of all, for your body to get activated, right? If your body doesn't get activated, then you're in big trouble if the lion's there. And so the first process the first thing that needs to happen within this process is activation. We need to get our body moving. But then on the other hand, it's just as important to deactivate that excitation when a threat has passed, right? Try doing complex math if there's a lion sitting next to you in the room, or if you think that there's a lion sitting next to you in a room, right? So in order for us to just move through the world, get stuff done, we need to be able to manage these ups and downs. And our body needs to more or less do this automatically. Right? A simple example of how we do it automatically and how it really, most of the time, it just passes straight through our awareness. Is if you think about, I imagine this is something that everybody has experienced. You're walking in the middle of the night and it's pitch black, and you're walking on a rug or on a carpet, or you're walking on the floor, and then you hit something, so your foot hits something soft and fluffy, and immediately you jump, and your body thinks it's a mouse or it's something, whatever it is, right? You get nervous, and immediately you'll feel your body activate, right? And what your body is doing there is it's preparing to get moving, to do something, right? Then you look down, and you see, oh, that's not a mouse, it's a stuffed animal, and immediately what will happen is you'll feel your body calm itself. That, in a nutshell, is the regulation system that our body has. And like I said, if your body doesn't do this more or less automatically, then it's going to be really hard to operate in the world. Now, the fact of the matter is that the process of drawing down is a lot harder than the process of activating yourself up. Often, right? Sometimes it happens automatically, but very often, drawing down is much more difficult than ramping up. And that's usually, when we talk about regulation, usually what we're talking, even though technically regulation means going up and down, typically what we talk about when we say the word regulation, we're usually talking about the process of calming the body down and deactivating all those, the process of excitation. Okay, now we're getting closer to that's regulation, right? Now, what's co-regulation? So before we get to co-regulation, we have to understand there are two different types of regulation, right? The first type of regulation is what we call self-regulation, and the second type is co-regulation. Self-regulation is all these things that we typically associate with calming ourselves down, right? So counting to 10, taking deep breaths, thinking, reframing our thoughts and thinking, it's all going to be okay. Doing meditation or mindfulness. These are all very useful self-regulatory skills. But actually, and it's typically, when we think about calming ourselves down, it's typically what we think about, right? Learning these skills is what we first associate with the process of regulation. But actually, it's really a secondary process in human functioning, right? The most direct way of calming down is co-regulation. Okay, so what is co-regulation? Now, if we go back to when infants are first born, so co-regulation happens the moment after birth, right? The moment after birth, the infant comes into the world and he or she is crying hysterically. And a process immediately happens where, hopefully, mother or some other adult calms down this child. And that's a process that continually happens throughout infancy and then throughout childhood. Infants don't have any capacity to self-regulate, and so they need parents or caregivers to regulate both their functioning, right? They need to be helped go to sleep. They need to be helped to get fed, but also they're in the same way their mood needs to be regulated. Children have no way, or excuse me, infants have no way of self-regulating. And so the parent's primary role in those first weeks and months is to regulate that child who is completely helpless. Now, as children grow up, they take on more of an ability to self-regulate, but co-regulation never disappears, and it always remains primary. So now, how it develops is a very, very interesting process, and it really becomes co in the sense of joint. It happens from both sides. The process begins to take place where the child and parent work together to calm in the process of calming the child down. I'll give you an example of how this looks and you know, the interesting ways in which it happens that are a little bit counterintuitive. So when we first made Aliyah, we lived in Nachlaot in Yerushalayim, and our kids went to Gan in Shari Chesed. Now on Rehov Ramban, there's a park. If anybody listening knows this park, so right now the park is excellent. They've done a great job at the park, but it used to be a death trap. The park was designed for little children to get hurt. I'm convinced of that. It was that somebody who was truly sadistic had designed that park. And the worst part of the park was that there was a path. There was a path that went through the middle of the park, and they had these iron swings that would swing in and out, in straight directly into the path that the kids were walking down. Literal iron metal swings. And so routinely, at least once an hour, a kid would get smacked in the head by one of these metal swings. There was one time I was with my, at the time, I guess, whatever, 3 or 4 year old son, and we were in the park, and this happened, and the kid is obviously the kid gets smacked in the head, and the kid is crying. And an Israeli mother, the Israeli mother comes to comfort her child. And what Israelis often say to their kids is something that when you actually translate it sounds awful, but is the comforting words that Israelis often say to their children is lo kara klum, right? Nothing happened. And so this mother comes to this kid who's just been smacked in the head by a metal swing and says lo kara klum, and I'm sitting there thinking something happened. Right? It's not that the message is off here. But what happened was the kid calmed down, right? And the reason that the kid calmed down was because the words actually didn't really matter, right? What mattered was that there was a connection that was made through body language, through caring, and a regulatory process occurred because the child was given the message: you are not alone in this. I'm here with you as you are in distress. But not only that I'm here with you, I'm going to help you right now. And it's that message, even if it's not given with words, that creates the regulatory impact. And the reason that it has that regulatory impact, the reason that this is such a perfect example of co-regulation, is because it's something we call attunement, right? It's the ability, it's feeling felt. Connection is the primary regulator because connection is what assures human beings of their safety. When human beings are disconnected, we feel unsafe, right? That's why if you drop your child off at Gan, right, on the first day, for the most part, most children, most little toddlers, when you drop them off at Gan, they cry. And the reason that they cry is because there's disconnection, right? They don't know, they've never been there, they don't know what's going on right now, and they feel a disconnection from a parent, and disconnection is the primary signal of danger. When a child feels I am disconnected, they feel I am not safe. Now, we've been talking up until now about young kids and toddlers, and you may be wondering, so what does this have to do with adolescence? But not only does it have something to do with adolescence, it has something to do with throughout the lifespan, right? This this process of co-regulation happens at all ages. It happens differently, but it never really stops, right? So if you have a difficult day, or you're going for a job interview, and you turn to your spouse and you get a hug before you leave, that's co-regulation, right? You are moving towards connection with somebody that you deeply care about, and that has a calming impact. Now, with teenagers, it looks very, very different than it does with young children. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is because teens can begin to self-regulate, right? They don't need us in that same way. And so, and teens want to try out this newfound ability. It's also co-regulation with teenagers is inherently ambivalent, right? Because when you co-regulation, helping another person calm down signals dependency, right? I need you. Now, try telling a teenager, you know what, I think that you actually need me right now, right? That's the fastest way to get a teenager to move as far away from you as possible. So there's an inherent ambivalence in the process of co-regulation with teenagers, but it doesn't mean, and we often misinterpret that. We often misinterpret their opposition, their distancing, as a message, I don't need you. But the research finding that is the most clear research finding that has been repeated again and again and again is that teenagers do the best when they have an adult in their life that they can turn to. So that's one complication with co-regulation. And the last thing that I want to talk about is co-regulation in a time of crisis. Co-regulation in a time of crisis creates a specific challenge, because in a time of crisis, everybody is dysregulated, right? Nobody is calm. And in order to help regulate another person, I need to be regulated myself. Right? There's been repeatedly what I found in my work over the past week and a half and in previous wars that we've been through is that clients are coming in with relational crises because they're just primed for either conflict or for disconnect, right? The activation has occurred. Their bodies are telling them, go fight with somebody or go run away from somebody. And now there's nobody to actually, in most cases, there's nobody to actually fight. And so who do you fight with? The person next to you, a family member. That's so what I imagine we're going to be talking about in the rest of this discussion are the particular challenges that happen in times of crisis as we try to co-regulate our teenagers. But the thing to keep in mind is that it's actually paradoxically right now is when co-regulation is needed the most. Now is the hardest time to give it. The key here, which is, I'm going to give something that's completely oversimplified, but still very, very important, is that the only way to be there to regulate our teenagers is to make sure that we ourselves are regulated. That's the only way that we give a chance. It doesn't take away the complication, but we give ourselves a chance when we can come in calmly to the connection with our teenagers.
Thank you, Dr. Gens. I'm going to invite Dr. Shira Wiesen to speak about creating a space for difficult questions and feelings from our kids. So, bevakasha.
There we go.
Okay.
Now I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I was going to say, if you're like me, I don't know how long your attention spans are, so I'm going to try and talk quickly and give you a lot of information in as brief amount of time as possible. So actually, what Zev spoke about, that's why I like panel discussions. I'm taking a very different approach, and they also go together to give you different tools for how to talk to our teenagers. So they don't contradict. It's just different tools to have in your tool shed, which I love that. And I think that that's great. So we're here now, almost 2 weeks into this horrific crisis that we were sort of thrust into. And while I'm sure many of you still have the questions about how do I just, regulate or deal with the crisis at hand, I feel like what's coming up now, or what I'm seeing in my practice and in the crisis phone calls that I've been fielding and in different trainings that I've done, is now that we're entering into a semi-long haul, the focus is shifting into how do we answer these longer haul types of questions? How do we address, particularly with our teenagers and our older kids who are now asking those deeper and very difficult questions to have any answers to? like the ones about how did God let this happen? What does that mean about my belief in God? Or if I didn't have a belief in God, for some kids who are now suddenly finding, kids, adolescents, are now finding that they have a belief and want to hold on to something. In our government, I thought we trusted our government. We trusted our army. Now I don't trust anymore. Who do I turn to? Fake news, not fake news. And for a lot of us on here who are Olim, to me, the question that punches you in the gut is when, or if your kid says, I don't know if I want to still live in Israel. And whether they mean that in the crisis time of why are we going back or why are we not going back to our country of origin, just even in their longer term picture of, I don't know if I want to stay here. So these questions are really very loaded and they're very intense, and they need to be addressed for our teenagers to navigate this crisis in a healthy way and in a stable way. And that, I think, comes back to us as their parents or as their role models or just adults in their lives to be able to answer them. So unfortunately, if you're expecting me to give you all the answers to these questions, I do not have the answer to these questions. I want to give you just some quick and effective tools for how to comfortably and confidently engage our adolescents in these dialogues when they ask these questions. So to get to that, I just diverge for a second. So a lot of research has been done on what is the most clear characteristic that helps build or predict success in a person. Is it intelligence? Is it SES, socioeconomic status? Is it emotional intelligence? What is this characteristic? And for anybody who knows Angela Duckworth, she wrote a book, she did a famous TED Talk, and she concluded that after studying hundreds of characteristics that we all have, the single characteristic that is the most effective in predicting success is grit. So what is grit? It's that ability to stick with something even when it gets hard. Perseverance, right? Similar quality. How do we work it through when I have a goal and there are several obstacles that either derail my goal, knock me down, I get told no, doors get closed? How do I stick with this goal even in the face of adversity? And grit and having this ability to be able to stick with that goal is this deciding factor of successful human beings in the long run. So how do we build grit? How do we build grit for ourselves? And importantly, how do we build grit for our children and in our teenagers? So I am a DBT clinician, dialectical behavioral therapy. I love DBT. If anybody on here is familiar with it, I think it's an amazing, amazing therapy with amazing insight in building emotional intelligence. And some of the core foundations of DBT, to me, really answer this question, where grit is this quality, how do we build it? How do we get it? How do we instill it in other people? And so two important concepts that are fundamental to DBT that I feel like answer this question are what's called validation and the dialectic. So I'm going to break those down for what are these two, and then we're going to come back to answering our tough questions from our adolescents. So validation, I'm going to assume a lot on you here have heard that term, understand what that term is. So what does that mean to validate? So that means to be able to let somebody know that how they're thinking or feeling or experiencing something is reasonable, is understandable. It's okay to be feeling that way. So here's where I diverge a little bit from what Zev said, where he was like, the answer isn't what's important. It's not the actual words, it's that connectivity. And I agree with that. And here's just a different approach to a similar situation where the words that are said actually are very important. And what we want to give in those words, what we are saying to our children, our adolescents, is that how they're feeling or experiencing something, that's okay to be feeling that way. And what's critically important, and where validation often gets a bad reputation, is that oftentimes we're afraid to validate if we think it means I have to agree with what my child is expressing. And validation has nothing to do with agreeing. I don't have to feel the same way. I don't have to even feel like that's a reasonable response. It's I'm letting you feel and experience what you are feeling. And that's separate from myself. And when we talk about validation, a lot of times for people who have heard it before, we're thinking, if my kid comes and says, I'm really scared these days. I don't know of a single person in Israel or in America or anywhere else who would say, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to invalidate that. I'm going to dismiss that feeling and say, there's really nothing to be scared of. So when it's an emotion that our kids express that makes sense to us, it's much easier to validate it. What about when it's an emotion or an experience that we actually don't agree with or that we don't share, like what I was talking about? Those are the moments that I'm specifically talking about are the most important to validate as well. And that's when it gets tricky, where when it's easy, we got it. I know how to be there for my kid, give them that hug, give them that verbal and emotional space to feel it because I get it. What about when I don't get it? What about when it's with these questions? You know, you want to talk about leaving Israel, and my gut is saying, of course we stay in Israel, or vice versa. Or you're questioning God, and I feel like my belief in God is even stronger, or vice versa. How do I validate in those moments? And that's what I'm talking about, where those are the really, really critical moments for our adolescents specifically, to give them that space and know that how they're feeling or experiencing something is reasonable and is okay, and that we open the space for them to be able to feel that way. Because even if I don't have to agree with it in order to give you the space to feel it. And that is incredibly important for them to experience that. So now you might be thinking, okay, so that's nice. So we validate it. What about if I don't want them to go back to America? What if I don't know what they're saying about the government? What do I do with that other stuff where these questions make us uncomfortable? And that's the second concept that comes up from DBT, where I said it's validation. And the second concept is a dialectic. So what is a dialectic? A dialectic is basically holding two opposite truths at the exact same time and allowing two opposite things, I'll call them things for right now, to be true simultaneously, which means I can have an internal dialectic where I'm experiencing two opposite emotions at the exact same time. I don't want to do something and I have to do something. I love you and you've hurt me and I hate you. I am enjoying this and I'm really nervous and scared about this, where I can have conflicting emotions, and rather than having to think in either or type of ways, it's both and. I can have both of these even when they are diametrically opposed to each other. And so once, if there's anything that I want you to walk away from what I'm speaking about, if there's anything I want you to take, it's the dialectic creates the space for the word and using the word and as opposed to but. And we think these words are very small. What's the difference if I use in a sentence the word but or and, like pretty insignificant? They actually have a ton of significance when it comes to emotional intelligence and how we communicate with other people. Think about it for yourselves. How do we sound in a sentence with the word but in it, right? I totally understand that you're feeling this way, but there's no way that that would ever happen. Where's the weight in the sentence? And I even said it neutrally. We all sort of, I'm assuming, are aware. The weight is in the second half of the sentence. What comes after the but is what I really believe. And normally when we say this to our kids, we actually have a sing-song. Do you guys know what I'm talking about as parents? I totally understand you're feeling this way, but na 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 na. Like we sort of like sing it as I'm giving you the validation, but here's what I really think, and here's what I really want you to think. And when we switch that small word of a but to an and, we actually create the space for this dialectic, for two things to be true. I can be experiencing something, and you can be experiencing something. I can have one emotion, and there's space internally for myself to be experiencing another one. And as opposed to then shifting the weight, because the but shifts the weight in that sentence, an and creates the space for two equal halves. And I don't mean equal that it's 50-50. It's not about a percentage on it. It's that two things can be true at the exact same time. So now if we take our two concepts of a validation and a dialectic, when our kids come at us with questions that either we're not prepared to answer, I'm not comfortable to answer, I don't like this question, I don't agree with the question, I know this is a hot topic question, any one of those, an approach that is effective and helps us even give the space to have these uncomfortable dialogues is to validate and what else? Use that dialectic. So I can validate the position where they're coming from. They ask a question, and kids, and especially adolescents, they're always testing the water of, Can I ask this question? Are my parents going to go there? How are they going to handle when I test them with this? And so it's a great way to be able, when they throw something at us, whether they're just testing the water or they're really grappling with it in that moment as is, if we validate and give them the space to feel whatever it is that they are feeling, and to remind myself, validating doesn't mean I'm agreeing. And so I can listen with a real ear and be able to say, like, wow, that must be really tough if you're questioning God. Let's say I'm not, or vice versa. I'm suddenly believing in God and I'm like, oh God, what does God have to do? Whatever it is. And I'm just giving stereotypical examples. I hope I am not offending anybody with any of them, where my gut reaction is, I don't want to be in my gut reaction. I want to give the space for their reactions, because we want to keep that dialogue open. That is the key of what I'm trying to get at. We want to keep it open so they keep talking, so they keep coming back to us and feel that we are a safe space for them. And if I shoot it down what they're saying, if I invalidate it right from the get-go, they're not going to come back and talk more. I was just dismissed. I was just shot down. Forget it. We want to keep that open, and that validation, which again, I don't have to agree with it. I can allow you to feel how you're feeling, gives them that space. And the dialectic means I'm not just stuck as a parent or as an adult only validating, because where do I get to say something? Where do I get to hold another thing out there, another truth out there? That's where the dialectic comes in, where after I have validated and I have let them feel and experience what they are, and at the same time, I wonder if there aren't other emotions we can be feeling. I wonder if there isn't room for other ideas or opinions. And that's where our own ideas, or as their parents, or as whatever, educators, mentors, where we can come in and be able to say, here's the space for you. And what else is also true? What else is also going on in addition to how you're perceiving or experiencing it, that we can work with both? There's space for this and there's space for this. And so it's not a butting of heads where we have to find an answer or the answer. There's room for all of it. And that, to me, coming back to how do we build this grit in our adolescence, we need to deal with these tough questions. They're asking them. And if they're not coming to us and we think my kid isn't dealing with it, I haven't heard them, trust me, then they're asking it and finding answers in other ways than from us, because it's out there and there's no way that they aren't addressing it. And so we want to be the ones, or hope to be the ones, that they come to and feel that they can engage. And I hope that this gives you some tools where our initial reaction is to be like, no, don't say that. Or, that makes me uncomfortable, or that can't be, or I don't have any answers myself because I'm dealing with them. If I sit there and I say, I now have an approach, validate it, listen to it, let them know that they're heard. And what else, as opposed to shrinking it, then that builds that ability to persevere, to really get through it. Even if my thinking is, I don't know where to turn to or what to do, how can we get through this and keep our eyes on the goals that we have, even when we're in the midst of such a crisis?
Okay, great. Thank you very, very much, Shira. And I'd like to invite Karen Green to speak about responding to our kids' unhealthy behaviors as they begin to integrate and cope with the new reality.
Hi guys. Thank you. You guys were amazing. I learned a lot. I always like doing these panels. Robbie, I feel like you always put together such good people. So many interesting things to think about. And I think what's interesting about this panel is that because we threw it together last minute, it's kind of come together in a really interesting way. And so what I'm going to talk about is more specific to, we're in a war and we have children who are in a war, and what do we do with the children in the war? And not specifically to the general stuff. Like Shira was saying, we already kind of dealt with that. Like we've all been on the Zooms and talked about to death of that, that's a bad word to use, but talked too much about, what's going on and how we're handling it. So I'm going to say that for me, one of the things that has come to me after doing all these sessions and group sessions and dealing with all this stuff, these are the things that are left over. I'm calling them the leftovers. And what I mean by that is that at this point, 2 weeks in, we are kind of going into the norm. Like this is becoming the norm. And, how do we deal with our kids at this point, who are, we were talking about before you guys got on the call, the idea that this is bringing up a lot of trauma from Corona, the idea of being locked in our houses and for different reasons not wanting to go outside. I'm at my friend's house because I can't be in my house because my son won't go to bed if I'm there. So I'm here, and her daughter was like, okay, I'm going out to take the dog, but just know if there's a siren, I'm going to die. Bye. So there's this constant thoughts, and she's a teenager, so perfect. So the question is, what are the unhealthy behaviors that are now coming out? For, let's say you have one kid, so what are the unhealthy behaviors of that one kid? But more likely, let's say you have 3 kids or 4 kids or 5 kids or 6 kids. Usually there's like 1 or 2 kids who are not really dealing with this very well. And I see in all of my friends' families that you have the one kid who really isn't dealing with it well. And that's what made me start to think about this. But when I started to write down my thoughts, I'm also thinking more about the idea that for every kid that you have, everybody is different. Every kid deals with this differently, and it's kind of a secret, right? There's no kid out there, I don't care if they're little until they're big. I mean, there are a few kids out there who are super dramatic and cry and let it all out. But in general, kids are just trying to be kids, right? That's their job. Teenagers are just trying to live their lives. They will not be put down. What I've noticed about this particular time versus Corona is that there's no putting the kids down. They're not going to stay out of life. That's not going to happen to them again. There is a refusal to go into your home and close the door and don't look back. They want to be out. They want to be in their lives. They do not want that taken away from them again. So the question becomes, what things are we looking for? So for the kids who are maybe some of the more, Robbie and I looked at this word, unhealthy, we couldn't come up with it, but the behaviors that are more problematic, I would say. So you want to look for signs that are more internal signs versus external signs. A lot of the teenagers are really good, especially the tweens, are good at putting on the face of what they think you want them to, you want to see. And that's not always the case, right? What's going on the inside. Also, they want to believe that that's what there is. When I was working at Crossroads, we used to talk a lot about their posa. I used to say that their kids at Crossroads used to come in with like a life-size cutout of themselves that's like one-dimensional and place it down and then kind of walk away so that nobody could see the rest of them. But that posa was like, could talk and could do and could laugh and oh my God, and all that stuff. But there was no depth to it. So I'm saying that is going on a lot right now. What other people are looking like, what if I should look like them. Remember that at this point in life, this part of development, the kids are looking towards each other. Teenagers are looking to each other, not necessarily to their parents, to understand what's going on in the world, what their opinion is, what their politics are, which is like a big thing for them right now, talking about their politics, looking at the politics. So they're looking for their peers. And right now they're being cut off from their peers again to some degree, but also the parent all of a sudden has become more important because your parent seemingly can keep you more safe than your friends can. So there's a lot of confusion that's going on for them. And so what that's doing is it's kind of turning them internally. And it's also creating even more of kind of a blurry, not an inability to be clear in your own head. I would say that everyone, all 26 of us that are here, are probably saying to themselves every day that you wake up that there's a lack of clarity in your heads. It's super blurry about sitting down and just doing your regular work or making your regular food or doing any of those things. It's hard for all of us. For teenagers, it's way harder to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. So you want to look for what's going on internally, and what that means is they might act as if everything's okay, but look at their body language. Are they startled? Are they excited to leave the house? Are they not excited to leave the house? Or what is actually happening? So I want you to be more of an investigator to your kids than you ever have been before. Really look at them. If a kid is functioning, be careful of the balance of functioning. If a kid is over functioning, you want to just check in with your kid and see what's happening there. If they're under functioning, you want to check that as well. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but just the idea of functioning is a big thing. You want to ask the questions that you're not necessarily going to get answers to. Asking a question, getting an answer is our favorite thing to do as adults, but you don't need the answer. Does that mean that you don't need to ask the question? No, it doesn't. Ask the question, just throw it out, lob it in there, and then say goodbye. In social work, we learn this term. It's called doorknobbing. It's on the way out of the session. The client grabs the doorknob and says, "This horrible thing happened to me. Okay, goodbye. I'll see you next week." I want to use doorknobbing in like a positive way. I want you to lob your questions at them as they're walking around the house or going out to their friends. The questions that you ask them are way more important than the answers. Just getting them thinking and helping them out of their own series of questions that they're going down the rabbit hole with. You want to notice if your kids are responding to things in the way that they normally do, like sort of, this is how they normally are in life, or is there something really different? How much they're keeping close to home. Are they keeping close to home because they're avoiding being outside, or are they keeping close to home because that's the rational thing to do, or that's what mom and dad want me to do, or Ima and Abba want me to do? The ability to concentrate is much harder, and I'm going to talk about that in a second too. But in the end of the day, understand that concentration is hard for everybody right now, and that's the norm. Easy to anger or lack of patience. These are things that are really important for us to understand that are happening, again, with everyone. Put it into context. But if your kid is angrier and it's disproportionate, that's what you want to look for. If the anger is completely off the charts, that is when it becomes a problem. You want to see if your kid is just staring off into space and not being here. Zev talked a little bit about the idea of fight or flight, right? And that when the adrenaline goes out into our system and what it does for us to prepare us. And one of the symptoms of like being in a space that you are frightened of, or even in a panic attack, is almost dissociating. It's just locking everything out. So we just want to make sure that we're looking towards our kids to see whether that's happening for them. Sometimes there's a lot of regression. Like I find myself saying this to my 9-year-old. You were just fine sleeping in your own bed before. There was no problem with you going and sleeping at a friend's house. Why is that happening now? And of course, as you say it, you're like, oh, I know why it's happening, or we get it, but we want our kids to continue to move forward. During this time, don't be worried about a little bit of regression, going back to old behaviors, or, those things that are happening. You want to make sure, even in responsibilities, like if your kids were responsible to do X, Y, and Z, and they're not doing it as well right now, compassion. You want to hold that boundary, but you want to be compassionate to them and let them get away with it a little bit more, because right now, all of us are having a little harder time holding that space. Not showing any emotion at all is another thing that we just want to look for. And being extra dramatic or disproportionate in your responses, extra crying, or allowing ourselves to break down and cry 50,000 times a day is not okay. Every time we allow people to just break down and cry mercilessly and turn into a puddle, that is not letting them feel. That is letting them fall apart, and it puts them in a dangerous position. We want to teach them how to contain themselves. Going back to what Shira said, we're teaching people to have grit. That means that when we allow our kids to let go a little bit, we also want to teach them how to then pull themselves back together again. And you might notice that you've got kids that are doing that. So the other part of this, and then I'm going to get into talking a little bit about getting past some of these behaviors, is getting lost in the war mode. I came over to my friend's house and she had the news on. I was like, "What are you doing? Turn it off." And she was like, "Okay," But we're lost. We're lost in Insta. We're lost in the videos. We're lost in the and Facebook. I had to put the kibosh on my own looking at things before I go to bed. I have 3 hours between the time I look at the last article and when I go to bed. They need to know from you what that means. But if you have a kid who really enjoys politics and is crushed by what is happening right now, we also need to give them the space to feel crushed. So a big thing that I've been talking about lately, as I go into talking about getting past these behaviors, is letting ourselves be in the day. Right now, all of us are in what I refer to as survival mode. And when I worked at Crossroads, it was a big thing that we talked about: surviving versus living. Surviving is getting through your everyday, and living is planning for a week, a month into the future. For right now, until we know more about what's going to go on in this situation, we are in survival mode to some degree. That means that your best bet is committing to each day. You wake up in the morning and you say, today is a new day, and I'm going to commit to today to do my best to get through it the best I can, finding my joy, finding my love, finding my laughter, whatever it is, whatever feelings I have during the day, I want to make sure that I allow them to be what they are, to go up and to go down, which is more of CBT language versus DBT. And it's knowing that it's going to hit you like a big wave or it's going to hit you like a small wave. Whatever the emotion is, we want to let ourselves have it. Because like in the airplane, if you're going to put the mask on yourself first and then put it on your kid, you got to let your emotions come up and go down before you allow your kids to do the same. You want to show them that in your fear might come and you might say, wow, I'm really scared right now. And you're going to let it go up. And then you're going to say, okay, it passed. I'm doing okay now. I want you to tell them and show them, model for them that when you have a feeling, you let it in, you let it run its course, and it goes away, and you move on. And you're not going to be stuck in that emotion unless you're holding on to it. There are, like, what do we say about teenagers? That we want to set clear boundaries. And so I'm going to say right now that we want to set clear boundaries, but we also want our boundaries right now to be things that are sort of swaying with the situation. So if your kid goes to bed later, is that okay? Is there, eating on the couch? In our family in Tyler, Texas, the idea of eating dinner and watching TV was like, never. We would never get to do that. But during specific times, like in tornado weather, we got to do that. There were times where we were allowed to do. So you want to think through the things in your house that you're okay with kind of letting go of and being together in this situation with them. Because for me, the biggest message to you is that we are all in this together. All of us are having all the feelings. We are all trying to figure this out. And it's not just the teenagers. So whatever it is that you're going through, it's not to say that you should put your stuff on them, but there is a partnership in this that you can feed into, and that your teenagers can self-regulate, like I was talking about. And so they can help themselves to get through this in a way that they couldn't before. And I want you to trust that they can do that. I want you to show them that they can do that. I want you to believe in them and let them do that. Doing for others and caring for others. We want to be careful as parents that we don't decide that our kids have to be super busy in order for them to be okay and not think about the war. My babysitter, whose mother is on the call with us today, said to me, I cannot do all the volunteering and have 4 hours of Zoom classes and go out and do this thing. Like, there's just enough. We don't have to do everything. We're okay. We can be alone a little bit. We can have a social life. We can be with our friends. We can do. Also, they feel inundated. So, we're sending our kids out to do these volunteer jobs. Every volunteer job is calling thousands of people. So just be careful that what you're sending your kid to do, that they really want to do it. They're not trying to just please you. That they have enough of the busyness, but they also have time to themselves. It's okay, even during a war, that kids have some time on their own, in their rooms, laying in their beds and feeling crappy. Bring them some ice cream, light a candle, lower the lights. Let them feel their feels, right? We have to allow them to do this. We want to make sure that we're noticing that we are doing the normal things in our house also, that there is some sort of routine. You want to add something to the routine, that's also fine. But teenagers might get out of doing that because they're so busy. But in this particular case, I would sit down and talk to them as a family and say, like, what can we do together each day? 30 minutes, 1 moment, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It doesn't actually matter the amount of time, but that actually sitting down at the same place. And if everybody is doing their own thing, even just in the same room, but I'm encouraging you to just be present physically with each other during the day, to try to let each other know that you're there. As I've talked about that, reacting to each other. But if you're not in each other's space, then that doesn't happen. If it's because you have to be, is different than when you're choosing to be. You want to make a way, you want to try to find a way to make them feel valuable, but that's something you want to talk to them about, what makes them feel good about what they're doing. If they do feel good about going out there and volunteering, great. Not every kid does. And I keep telling people, I give you permission to not volunteer. You don't have to volunteer. Not everybody has to volunteer, right? Not all teenagers have to create their own app for the soldiers' food needs. There are those kids who do that, but they don't all have to do that. They can concentrate on themselves or concentrate on their little siblings, or whatever it is, they concentrate on their studies. But let's make sure that we are allowing them to let us know what it is they need and what it is they want. I want to make sure not to put our stuff on them. We think that they will do better to do X, Y, and Z, so we're going to get them to do it. So whatever is going on with them, let's just make sure that we're checking in with them. Talking to your kid every day in depth, I just wouldn't do it. I know that sounds crazy. Karen Green, you're crazy. I can tell you that even, especially for the good kids, like the nerdy kids, the kids who are going to do, like, they do what you ask. They're compliant. They listen to their parents. And if the parents say talk, then, they're going to talk, right? But I can tell you from experience of talking to teenagers that asking the questions or opening up a space for them to know that they can talk is way more important than having them sit down and have an in-depth talk with them every day. It's there. If you offer it and they can come into it, you offer it like this. Hey, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on? And the answer is going to be, I'm good. Because that's the answer. And then you're going to say to them, did you see what happened today in XYZ? Or did one of your friends do this? That's it. And if they then want to be brought into conversation, they will talk about it with you. As far as I'm concerned, the heart emoji and the this emoji has saved my life, because I believe that when you use that emoji, when somebody's texting you from America, trying to have a conversation with you, it shuts down the conversation. In the same way, when you ask a question, you can ask, you've got 2 chances, and then let them be, right? Let them be in their own space and let them come to you when they need. You want to be aware that they walk in the room, that you're not doing this. Lift your head up and look at them. But teenagers are there to be looked at. When you look them in the eye, they're gonna respond if they want to. Lastly, I would say that sleeping and eating is really important. So if you're not sleeping and eating, try to work on it. I'm personally worked with a homeopath. She's amazing. She's a Modiane. I recommend her to any of you. Work on it. It is important that you do that, because if you don't, then you're going to have a hard time working with your kids, and your kids need it. They need to eat. We need to make sure that our kids are eating and sleeping as much, in a good way as possible. Even changing your ways of eating or making new things that are more healthy or whatever it is. This is a good time to sort of go into that place. And lastly, I think that everybody has too much on their minds. All of you people that are on this chat and the Zoom, and who are going to watch the Zoom later, you all need to dump out your brain. And if you do it, you can also do it as a family, or you can have your kids do it. In CBT language, it's called worry time. 4 to 4:30 every day, you sit down, you have to use a pen. You may not use your computer. You have to use a piece of paper or a notebook that you don't care about. This is not for a pretty journal. And you let everything out that's been going on in your mind. Is my friend Hirsch going to make it home from Gaza alive? I don't know. I need to write that down. I need to write down all of my fears for his parents and for our families and for everyone we know. I got to get it out. Because if you're going down the rabbit hole every day, you are not going to be present for your teenagers. And if your teenagers are spending their days constantly thinking, what we do psychologically is we hold on to all of our thoughts, because if we think, if I hold on to these thoughts and they get really big, they must be really important, and I have to hold on to them or I won't be able to take care of them. Not true. If you let them out and you let them settle, and then you spend the rest of that time from 4:30 in the evening to 4 o'clock the next day, and you say to yourself, as the thought pops up, it's okay, I wrote it down already, I'll get to it tomorrow. psychologically, that's going to give you space to think about other things. It's going to clear your mind just a little bit. And having your teenagers do that is, especially when you have a teenager who's got all those, their heads up in the sky, what's going to be and how it's going to work, and do I have to go to the army, and all those questions. We need to be able to get them settled back on the ground. So that is what I have to say for now. And I move on to Robbie and the questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. If you're here listening, you could send a message to Sigalit, Crossroads staff, with any further questions. We got a number of questions. Some are difficult questions. Not sure how easily answered, but I'm going to put as many out as I can. Two similar questions that we received is, how should a parent speak to a teen who doesn't share much, goes about his day? When they ask what he's thinking, how he feels, he says, good. And an alternative question is, a parallel question is, every time I ask my teens how they're coping with the current situation, they tell me they are fine. How can I draw them out more? So I'm opening that up to do I have to unmute everyone again?
No, I'm okay. Oh, I don't know. I'm unmuted. I'll start and say that teenagers are like in Israel we call them Mivchan Amerikai, which is a multiple choice test. So you need to treat your teenagers as if you are giving them a multiple choice test. The how are you doing or how are you coping? It's too broad. But if you say, are you sleeping okay? Or, how much did you sleep last night even? Or, when's the last time you had something to eat? Are you feeling, is your anxiety a 0 or is it a 20 or is it a 40 or is it a 60? So you're giving it a number. Are you having a headache or a chest ache or a tummy ache? Because those are the 3 places that we hold things. So you want to ask them specific questions. And even better is asking a question about someone else. How is your friend Dove dealing with the situation? So much easier for them to be like, oh my God, he's not dealing with it well at all. He's doing X, Y, and Z. And then you can say, oh, that's not how you deal with it. And then they can let you in. That's what I would say.
Piggybacking on that, so I definitely agree with all of that. I would say emotionally also, not just on the physical multiple choice, on the emotional realm, that a lot of times I'll also say to my kids, I find for myself, like I'll be reflective and I'll put it out there for them and say, yesterday was a really hard day for me and I was crying or obsessively checking the news. And today I feel a little bit more stable. I wonder, do you relate to either of those? Have you experienced where I'll put out the emotions and then wait for them? Because as Karen said, if I just say, how are you? There's nowhere to even go with that. So then they're just going to shut down and say good because I don't have any other answer. Where sometimes if we give them the multiple choice, both on the, specific eating, drinking, also on the emotional, to add that component where I'll feed them the emotions and then say, do you relate to any, have you experienced them? And sometimes they'll still just say, no. And in general, I'll find that they'll be like, yeah, today was a little bit harder, or today was better. You'll get something. And just as Karen was saying, that's your hook. That's your way in. Once you've already engaged them and they'll answer sort of one type of question, then you can usually sort of massage the conversation than just the very broad opening.
Yeah, and I'll just add one small point here, which is I think often we have to ask ourselves, why are we asking questions? If you look at how kids and teenagers usually talk to each other, it's often very different than how adults talk to each other. But when you're going out as an adult, when you go out with your friends, there's usually a back and forth that involves the asking and answering of questions. Kids don't often talk like that. And so very often asking kids questions turns into an interview and sometimes then into a grilling, which will just make your teen move away from you. So the first question to ask yourself when you're tempted to ask questions is, am I trying to elicit information that's important for me, or am I just trying to make a connection? And very often when we are asking questions, it's because we're trying to get into some type of dialogue. It's the opening that we know in getting dialogue. Now, sometimes there's information that we actually need, right? You know, did you go to Zoom class today? You know, maybe we need that information. I don't know. You know, that's a question that needs to be asked because it's information that we need to elicit. But when we're just trying to make a connection, you know, there's often other ways of doing it that don't involve or needn't involve kids giving over information in response to a question that we've asked them.
Okay. I'm not sure we related to this, but someone asked it, so I want to put it out there. It's a difficult question. One of the things I've heard from kids is the parents on the kibbutzim couldn't protect them, so how can you promise you will protect me? It's not something you can promise. What can one do to rebuild the sense of security and protection amongst our children?
Well, that's an easy one.
Right. I had the hesitation asking it, but it was put out there. So
I've been talking a lot about the word safety. I think that we need to read like, I do not think that means what you think it means. You know what I mean? Like, I think it needs to be like worked on. The word safe, it's a big, all the words like love, safety, it's a spectrum. Sometimes we feel more safe and we feel even more safe and really, really safe, right? There's a spectrum that goes along with it. So just saying you are safe is not really answering the question. And I think that one of the things that I've been encouraging teenagers and young adults to do is come up with their own idea of what is safety, and to understand that it's not a definitive term that's right or wrong, or that has one way of looking at it, but that you can create your own sense of safety at any time. Wherever you are, you can create your own sense of safety. And that's what we want to encourage people to do, is to understand that if, you know, being in my home makes me feel safe, or only being in a car and not being on my bike, it's really arbitrary. You know, why is it okay in your car, but because I decided that my bike, I would, if the siren thing, and then I would have to lock it up, and I got all lost in it, so I took my car. Right? It's safety is arbitrary. It's not this one thing. So one of the ways we want to do it is to try to work with them on talking about, you know, this, what they can control on one side, because we can't control what happens in the world and on any day, but we go out there anyway. And so what we do is we do our best to keep ourselves safe and healthy, and by being in our lives and making sure that we're aware of what's around us. But we aren't in charge of what the other people in the world are doing. We can only do what we can do for ourselves, and that sometimes can be a comforting thing, that I know that I'm in charge of me, and so how I'm going to handle myself is the thing I can control.
I very much resonate with that, and I think it's that it riffs off of this a newfound capacity that teens have to think, which they're often not so good at, but they can just begin to do that. I think if a teen asks a question in such a challenging way, they're usually trying to elicit something that is beyond the stated question. Usually, what I found when teens ask that type of question is that one of the things they're looking for is if their parent is going to give them nonsense, or if they're going to be authentic with them. If a kid says, you know, you can't protect me, you know, look what happened in the kibbutzim down south. What they're often looking for is, they're saying to the parent, are you going to give me a meaningless statement to get me off of my back, to get me off of your back? And I think it's, you know, especially with older teens, but even with younger teens who can think. We have to find some way, you know, and this goes back to Karen's point. We have to find some way to relate to them authentically. You know, if you give them nonsense, they're gonna sniff you out immediately.
Well, that I feel like is exactly what I was talking about, where the validation and the dialectic. And what I would say is that, you know, when kids talk about these blanket statements, exactly what Karen and Zev were saying, this is building grit. Safety and trust has to be rebuilt. That is a true statement. And we need to give the space to not just give, you know, a fake, inauthentic answer of like, we are safe. We don't feel safe. As adults, we don't feel safe. And to be able to give the space for our kids to say that, And to acknowledge that and to hold that is so containing for them. To be able for them to say, I don't feel safe. How can you protect me? To be able to say, like, you're right, like that's a fair statement to feel that way and to feel unsafe. We as a family, as a community, as a country, as a nation, we have to rebuild that sense of safety. And that's exactly grit. That's what it means, that we as each of those levels are going to need to rebuild that after such a massacre and tragedy that happened and befell us. And that's what I think is part of us as a nation that we've shown for the last couple of thousand of years, and how we talk about that in modern times is also this ability to persevere even when we are knocked down. And that takes time. There isn't some quick answer of how you don't feel safe. You are, oh, it'll be okay. There's no quick fix. And to give that space gives them the space to also work it through. And just another answer to that, which I thought was really interesting, that I heard from Alan Frusetti, if any of you were on his Zoom that he did, where what he said in terms of like regulating emotions, where we want to try and help ourselves and our kids go from only fear to also fear. Where when it's only fear, then I only feel unsafe. I only feel fear. I only feel the negatives, and there's no room for anything else. And what we want to move ourselves and people to, and especially our teenagers, is that I can feel that fear. I can feel that lack of safety. It's not the only thing. Where there's also fear, which means there's also something else. And that we can talk about safety on micro levels, even if on the macro levels we're not. And we can start to rebuild from it being only fear and only trauma to also feeling those negative things. And that also creates the space.
I'll add one thing to piggyback on that, to say that I think that there is a culture where we believe that if something terrible has happened, that we have to be in a bad mood and be somber and be pensive and crying and down, and God forbid we should feel anything but, like laughing or having a good time or doing any of those things. And I think Shira, you actually talked about this, that you can hold many emotions inside of you at the same time. And I always give the example that my son was born, and 3 weeks later my father passed away, and I was both the happiest and the saddest I've ever been exactly at the same time. And right now we are in that state of mind. Kids need to know that it's okay. We need to give them permission to laugh, permission to feel fine, permission to forget it for a few minutes or not think about it for a few hours. They are not supposed to be anything. None of us should be acting this way. There are no shoulds, right? So making sure that when we're relating to them on all these, the harder emotions, the fear, the safety, the lack of safety, and all those things, that we are giving them that permission to be like, okay. And wasn't that really funny that, X, Y, and Z happened? My friend called me and told me that he met this woman in Boston, and he did this just to make me laugh, named Immaculate Conception Lipschitz. Come on, that is funny. That's a ridiculous name. And we decided that they probably could just call her Connie for short, because, what are you going to do with that? Laughing and being with your kids and showing them that we can laugh and have that pit in our stomach or that fluttering of our heart at the same time is absolutely the way that we're supposed to be.
Hey, what model can you provide? I think model/strategies can you provide for teens talking to other teens about touched by this tragedy? And the person goes on to describe how their child's classmate has a sibling who's also a student in the school, who was initially listed as missing and then identified yesterday as murdered. What language or strategies can we suggest or can we offer to support our teens in talking to their peers, where they might not know what to say?
So I'll take that one, because again, I think I do just keep repeating what I said in my 10-minute spiel, because I think that it's really important to realize that it applies to a lot of these. First of all, it's important for our teenagers to know that they're not therapists and they're not counselors and they're not mental health or crisis team people. And so while they are there and teenagers rely on teenagers and they will go to them, so they do need the tools. So I will get to that in a second. It's important that they also know that they have the ability to say, I think it's important that you talk to someone else and that they don't have to feel that they are carrying the entire burden because it's their friend, because they confided in them. And to remind our teenagers that if or when they're in these moments, to give them the tools and also give them the ability to say, I think you need to talk to somebody that's not just 14 or 16 or 18, somebody who has more experience in this. And that, first of all, is important because then that's calming to our adolescents to know that they don't have to have all the answers because they're not supposed to necessarily have all of these answers. So that's first of all. And second of all, what I think is so important is being in that space with them without our teenagers thinking they have to fix this or they have to solve it because they can't. And so to be able to just know if we give them the tools, like what I said of validation and, with that dialectic, if they're just able to validate in as simple terms, adolescents, I think Zev, you had said it, they don't communicate in the same question answer. They communicate through emojis. That's like validating to them. You send a fire or a heart, it's a conversation stopper. And it's also like, that's my whole statement to an adolescent. I understand what you meant in that, 3 set of emojis, where if they're just able to be in that space that they don't need to have that pressure to fix it. And also I can still be there for my friend. That balance space gives them the ability to be there and also like step back when they need to, which is so important.
I think there's something to be said for understanding of, how grief works. And that, like I said before about holding both emotions, that you let them know that their friends need to also be talked to in a normal way. They don't want to just talk about what happened. They want to just talk about life. Like tell them, that they can also say, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? And that person might be like, oh my God, what happened to that person? Because when something bad has happened in your life, you don't want to just talk about it all the time, right? When they don't want to talk about it, you want to let them know that it is absolutely fine for them to talk to them about what's going on in their own lives, because that helps the kid feel normal, feel okay. Remember that life is still happening around them. And when and if they want to talk about the harder stuff, it's just about listening. It's just listening. Like you started to say, right? It's just being there and just listening and hugging them, making sure that they know that they're being seen and they're heard and that they're loved and cared for or whatever it might be. But being in conversation as a teenager means being in a holistic conversation, that it's about everything. It's not just about the one thing. So if you come to your friend and you look at them, you know how many times they have in teenage movies where like, I don't want to be seen that way, so I didn't tell anyone that I had cancer. It's like that. I know movies make it seem like kitschy, but it's true. The person who lost the sibling doesn't want to get that, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, that's so terrible. Are you okay? We want to make sure that your teenagers know, like, just treat them like your friend. They are still your friend, even that they've gone through this tragedy. You want to smile at them and you want to give them a hug and love them and take their lead. Let the other person lead them. And then they follow. That's it. So they don't have to know what to do. They just have to be able to be there to be led.
Yeah, and I really don't have all that much to add. In addition to what Shir and Karen just mentioned, the one thing that I'll just note is that whenever we are talking to our kids about their relationships with their friends, I think it's wise to tread carefully. I think that we have to, as old people, and that's how we are looked at by teenagers. We have to recognize that we are foreigners to the culture that arises amongst teenagers and their friends, and there should be some modesty in when we intervene in that realm, because in many ways they know a lot more than we do about how things work socially. It doesn't mean that we have no role to play, and there's some balance to hold between being there as a consultant and letting your teenager know that you're there to talk about what goes on between them and their friends. But you could also be tentative and ask them. They know a lot more about what's normal in their friend group than you do. As we offer our advice, it's good to know that advice has some limitations to it.
Okay, thank you. Another question: how do we balance our kids' needs to deal with their fear and grief, which sometimes means lying in bed too much and watching movies, versus getting them up and doing things? Might have been related to somewhat already, but it was put out there, so I'm gonna ask it again.
I like to think of it as like there's like a line of functioning that we kind of want to hold to. They're the basic needs that have to be met. They need to take care of themselves, take a shower, change their clothes, or at least their underwear, or as my son would say, their underwears, and eat at least 2 meals a day, I would say. And if there's things they're supposed to get done, so you want to figure out what it is that they're supposed to. So for each kid is different, everybody's life is different. But when you have that baseline, I always say that we're all dealing with anxiety, we're all dealing with depression, we all deal with all these things, and that the line where a professional comes in is when that person stops functioning the way that they're supposed to function, whether they're avoiding things or they're doing things that are harmful to themselves, whatever it might be. But I do want to say again that it is okay for your kid right now to be a little depressed, because it is depressing. So you don't want to just take away, like, just because someone feels depressed doesn't mean it's wrong or bad or diagnosable. It's just really depressing right now. So if your kid is a kid who needs to spend some time, but it also goes out and plays soccer and also meets up with their friends, then when that kid is home and they want to be a little bit more in their bed. But you know what the great thing about humans is that you can actually say it out loud. Just say to them, I'm going to say that it's okay right now for you to be sleeping a little bit more, just not forever, because I want to give you space to feel your feelings, and it's okay for right now. That way they know it's okay and they don't judge themselves for doing it.
In general, I think we as parents, we often spend way too much time focusing on how our interventions with our kids are going to impact them in the long term. We actually don't really know anything about how what we do now will impact how that will impact in the long term, and we have much less control than we think we do. What we should be generally focusing is on present well-being as opposed to longitudinal success. It's just a calmer way of going about parenting, and I would say it leads to a lot more. It does lead to a lot more well-being. I think that's generally it's a generally a good principle to hold to, but I think specifically now, I think what we can release from ourselves, the pressure that we can release as parents, is thinking about how what is going on right now is going to impact in the future. During trauma, the future becomes much less relevant, and we are still in a time period of trauma. Right? We're typically, part of human functioning is being in contact with future versions of ourselves. Right? If you as an adult, if you save some money and put it away for retirement, it's because you're talking to your future self that is 80 years old and doesn't want to work until they're dead. But in trauma, we lose contact. We lose at least accurate contact with that future version of ourselves. And so I think as parents, the guide for how we intervene and where we push our kids should be their present well-being as opposed to how this is going to impact them in the future.
I would just add, Karen sort of said a line, and as she was talking, I was like, that's so funny. You have a line, I have a window. So all piggybacking on each other, where I sort of call it, and have been telling everyone who I work with, where there's like this window of tolerance. And if our window is very, very small, then we often think I'm not functioning, I'm not doing okay. And then we have to move sort of in this even keel way every day, all the time. Whereas if we have this wide open window of tolerance and realize that I can be here and then here and then here and then here, all in an hour or all in a day or all in a week, and I'm still within that baseline of functioning, then it's okay. And I love as a parent to be reflective to my kids and to say, like, when it is a harder time or when it is a better time, or I'm functioning in a different way, or this was how I'm feeling, as a space for them to have a window and to realize that there isn't one way of coping, or being in your bed too much or too little. so long as we're in this window. And then, as Karen said, where if it's then steady over time and it's too much sleeping, and what does too much mean? Then we're getting into a private specific question. I'm saying then we can talk about, is this not in the healthy realm? It's, am I in this window where today I was sleeping too much? So we note it. And I'm also not going to then make assessments about their longitudinal, as I've said, functioning. I'm going to note it. And then if they're also still going out with friends, and then later they're laughing and doing this, and then they're in their window, and that window is wide open now with the trauma, and it's going to shift and look very different, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One last question. I want to respect our speakers' time and our participants' time. And there was a number of other questions, and if I didn't get to yours, I apologize. How do you instill more hope in such a dark time? Again, also not an easy question, but how do we instill as parents? How do we offer more hope in such a dark time?
So again, I'll take that first, and again, I'm always a bit skeptical of what we can instill in our kids, and where that leaves us is focusing on ourselves as parents. How can we instill hope in our kids? Is by being hopeful ourselves. That's a whole another panel discussion about how does one instill hope, and how does one hold the various feelings that are assaulting us constantly. But I think instilling hope with a kid, I think there may be ways to talk to kids about this, and that may be somewhat effective. But I think primarily kids, and especially teenagers, are looking at us, and the way we manage hope for ourselves is, I think, primarily the way that's what our kids will pick up on.
I also think that hope is built, and it needs to be rebuilt, sort of like our fear and trust and security. It's one of those it's a hard question, because it's almost like the opening question of, how do we build security again? How do we build hope? To me, they're flip sides of almost like the same coin. And they need to be rebuilt with time. And to me, it comes with a lot of sort of micro going to the macro, where when we give kids that they can have hope that their fantasy football team, now that they have more time to watch it because they're not in steady school, will do well, they're hopeful about their team. That's hope. And that's on the micro. That's on my small, kid's life, that we're able to say there isn't only fear. There isn't only misery. There's also misery and fear and hope. And you're looking towards things that are important to you on the micro level. And then we move out a little bit, that our communities are rebuilding and replanting and regrow, whatever it is, that then we expand out, and it's built over time to instill that sense. And as I've said, like, if I don't believe it, then that's hard to regrow, rebuild it for others. It's if I feel that, and then slowly giving the space and realizing that everybody rebuilds those emotions at a different pace and in a different way, and it looks different for each person. And so there isn't a cookie cutter answer for what our kids or ourselves should or shouldn't or have to. Or we've got the space for everybody to feel whatever they're feeling and how they're going to feel it, and to rebuild it in the ways that speak to them.
I would go back to what I said about safety and remind ourselves that we don't have to rebuild hope. That word hope, it's too big, just too big. What our job is to live our lives the best that we can, be our best people, teach our kids to be the best they can be. And in doing so, without using the word hope, hope is built. It is built. It's not, if you put 2 + 2 together, it's going to create hope. It's feel. Make your connections with the people around you, deepen those connections, achieve something small, achieve something big. My son said to me the other night, I said, I've been trying as a single mom to get my kid just to say, I love you too, when I say I love you. Is that so much to ask? He just doesn't do it. And the other night we were laying down and he goes, I said, I love you, hon. And he goes, I love you too. And then he goes, I said it. There it is. I have hope. Just like that. I didn't call it hope. I didn't ask. I didn't need it because it was hope. But in those small moments, like you were talking about in the micro instead of the macro, the small moments that we have in the world of love and of connection and of things working out, that passively builds hope. So what we can do is continue to live our lives the best we can every day, every minute, do the best we can, find those moments, point them out, laugh at them, do all those things. And I believe that hope will come.
Okay. With that, I'm going to thank our speakers and everyone who came to join us. Personally, I found it very meaningful and enriching to be here. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Robbie.
Again, if you're aware of a teen or of a young adult who's struggling and needs support, and you feel like Crossroads and our staff of therapists and social workers can be help, so please be in touch. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Robbie.
Thanks, Robbie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, other panelists.
Yes, thank you.